Hi, I'm Michael,
And I'm Justin.
and this is our podcast where we discuss what we find interesting about the intersection of Web3 and digital security as we know it.
Between us, we have years of experience securing digital products and infrastructure, which has led us to be constantly curious about what's next.
Which is what this podcast is about, sharing our journey as we update our mental models for security in the next internet.
So why are we here today? Today I had not today, but the last few weeks had an interesting thought come across my mind. Our first podcast, I don't know if you want to go back and check that out, was all about us expounding on why we're Web3 bulls, even though it's not cool to be a Web3 bull right now. And at the time we're recording, it's a bear market and an extended one. And also it's never been in favor with engineers such as ourselves. Like that's always what's kind of separated Michael and I from the rest of our peers in some respects, in that we actually like Web3. Not all, obviously, but we're the only ones we know that do. We're the only ones that are actually interested in its use case, its potential use cases. And so that was what our first episode was about, in terms of how we feel it differs from Web2 to Web3, why the philosophical difference around it, as well as some of the technical things. And then I had another question land on my mind as a result of that, which was, now that AI has come to take up all of the oxygen in the room, and by the oxygen in the room, I mean from certain sectors of society, etc., why does it feel as though Web3 never achieved this level of interest or hype, so to speak, when it first burst onto the scene? Probably, I think the white paper came out in 2009, 2010. Someone's
Like
going to have to correct
the
me on that.
Bitcoin white paper?
Yeah, the Bitcoin white paper, which was the first nascent Web3 application when you think about it. It never captured the imagination of engineers, non-engineers, in a way that AI has. And obviously, and my question is, well, why do we think that is? I have some ideas, I have some thoughts, but I thought that would be a good topic for us to discuss in today's episode.
Yeah.
So Michael, go
No,
ahead.
I think it's a good topic, right? And I'm kind of coming, like I've thought about, like you texted it to me a few days ago, like, hey, I've been thinking about this, thought about it on and on. I still don't really have an answer, so I'm kind of like excited to like work it out real time, I think. And I think the first thing I would say is, like, there's multiple ways of looking at this, right? And one way of answering the question, and I think one way, like, a lot of people would answer the question, is like, because there aren't a lot of build cases for Web3. Like if you take the skeptical sort of perspective, right, on Web3, on crypto, on blockchain, whatever. It's kind of like, well, yeah, like the difference is AI is useful and Web3 is not. And like, that's why, there seems to be more longevity in the build, kind of like the builder interest, or like the engineering interest, I guess, in AI, and not in Web3. So like, I think that's like one answer one could take, right? It's not the answer either of us would take, though.
Yeah, I agree.
And hopefully we have good reasons for that.
Yes. I mean, we've tried. We've been given a long time to come up with them. I agree with that to some respect, in that the use case seems blatantly more obvious to those who don't need to be in tech to understand how useful this thing can be. And it's funny, because I was thinking about it, and I had a discussion with this with someone else as well. In my naivety, obviously, we always knew AI was, like, Google DeepMind was based in London. Like, all of that stuff was kind of bubbling in the background in the late noughties and the teens and stuff. I did not realize. Again, a lot of the literature was around, well, it's almost like fusion, right? It's 10 years off, 10 years off, 10 years off.
That's how AI felt cool right stuff up until GPT
That's how
released,
AI
basically.
Exactly. Yeah. It felt like the fusion of tech. And then on top of that, I remember I read an article about Google building its massive office in King's Cross, and it was going to be AI controlled, all its HVAC systems and things like that. And I was like, okay, well, then that's the use case for it. I never saw it as basically this all-round capable chatbot that was going to be able to basically help you with any query you had. I didn't see it emerging as a chatbot. I didn't see it emerging and then realizing, oh, wait, hold on, this can assist in every use case. As long as you can formulate a problem, it can help you come up with a solution. So when it came out in chatbot form, I was like, oh, that makes sense. And so that's why I think it has caught fire in a way that Web3 hasn't. In opposition to that, though, you raised the point about the use cases being so we're talking about the obviousness of use cases, right? And that's because it's been packaged that way. but it's also being delivered to us by one in a singular vision. One company has done this. Like OpenAI has opened the floodgates in a singular vision, whereas Web3 wasn't. Web3 wasn't a singular vision. It wasn't one company. It was a random white paper, and it's effectively open source in a way when you think about it, because it's decentralized by definition. So it's kind of open source. So no one person is going to force that thing in. And then you start to think about it. I'm like, okay, so Web3 is kind of, where if you were to place it in the OSI layer data stack,
Oh, okay.
where would you place it? Because it's not infrastructure, but it's kind of infrastructure, but it's not an application, but it is an application.
Like, I think it's a different stack, right? Like, I think
Yeah,
it has
it's a complete different stack.
Yeah, because like, you know, like in the last episode when we talked about Web 2 and we talked about client server models and the way that influences, what did we call it? We had a really good name for it, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
The political economy.
There we
the web,
it.
Right?
That was it. Yes,
and like the OSI model is basically like a stack native to like a client server architecture, right? Because it's about,
that's a fair point. Yeah,
it's about the way that like an application runs in that kind of stack, the way it, you know, receives networking even, and the way that transits like down and then up, or up and then down, or whatever. And Web3 is like not that, right? Like Web3 is a different platform on which to build applications that isn't a computer, basically.
That's true.
But
also, correct, but then this is the thing. The reality is, this is what I'm saying, right? Because it's a twist, it's a variation on a theme, because it still operates on TCP/IP, it still operates on data physical network. So it's like, it is a whole new stack, but it's a variation on a theme of the old stack. But more importantly, the reason I've come, sorry to get into the weeds there for our listeners, but basically the whole reason I've come to that conclusion is, I'm like, okay, so as a result, it's something you can build things with, whereas AI chatbots are the end result of something being built, and therefore its applications, to my mind, become a lot more obvious in some respects. What do you think?
Yeah, totally. No, I think you're right. Like, so I think there's a good insight there around the singularness of the vision that is going on, you know, particularly with OpenAI. And I think that, like, when I think about the use cases of it, right? So you talk about like Google using it for HVAC systems or whatever, right? I know nothing about that use case, really. But for a long time, a lot of AI use cases, and even a lot of like AI products that we would have used in cyber, like, you know, in secure, on the security side, or on the engineering side, it was kind of like, well, like, this AI isn't giving us much more than like a rules-based system would, you know. And I felt that way particularly with a lot of security products. It's like, okay, like this advanced, you know, AI mining and categorization and blah blah blah, at least in the kinds of systems we were working in. Maybe it's different elsewhere, but really isn't giving much more leverage than, you know, a rules-based thing like this and this and this equals bad or something. And it introduced a lot of complexity that rules-based systems didn't have. And so it kind of actually felt like why would I do this, of like the way people think about Web3 in that way, right? But then like the killer app or whatever of AI really was like language, right? Like the thing that like the realization that kind of unlocked all of this is that one, language is essentially like a statistical model, and that a lot of our reasoning in the way that it kind of gets instantiated in language apes that statistical model.
Okay.
And it's not complete, right? Like, reasoning is not the same as statistics, but for a lot of use cases, that doesn't matter. And like chatting in natural language with a computer about a topic turns out to be almost always a use case where that doesn't seem to matter. Where like reasoning and the statistical inferences of language Like if you like Venn diagram that, it's close to
Yeah.
a circle or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then that's combined with like humans, like we mediate our reason through language, like we
Yeah.
mediate our cultural interactions through language, we
Yeah.
mediate our thoughts through, like almost everything that we do as humans is mediated through language.
Yes.
So we're very familiar with it. And
Yeah.
so when something actually like matches it, we have a very strong impression, like that leaves a very strong impression on us, right?
Yes, it does.
And I think that's, to me, that's kind of like when I think about the use case, I think about like language use cases, chatbots, even the different ways that like we encode other problems into language, like, you know, playing games with them, you know, like chess or tic-tac-toe or whatever kind of things that you interact with them. Like, yeah, that's why that impression gets made on us that this is like a useful thing, right?
Yeah.
And it is genuinely a useful thing, obviously.
Oh yeah, no
right?
one's debating. No one's debating the usefulness of chatbots.
But that's something, to your point, that's something Web3 doesn't have. It doesn't have that kind of natural familiarity.
No, because it introduces a brand new nomenclature. Like everything's different. Terms are overloaded. Phrases that you understand, words and labels that you're used to understanding in one context don't make sense. Like the most famous one you and I have endlessly harped on about is wallet. The concept of a wallet, Web3 wallet. It's like that. That is the complete and utter opposite of what a wallet is in real life. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what the label we've given to use. So it's a completely different paradigm. You've got to understand it in a different way, and then you just go slowly, like, which is why most engineers are standing from ground zero when they're trying to understand Web3. And then along came this crypto stuff, and obviously we've talked about that already. That turned everybody off because it's like, well, what? Okay, so this is kind of money maker scam. No, there's actually interesting tech here. So yeah, Web3 doesn't have that. And again, I mean, these problems, I don't think we're saying anything new when we're saying Web3's major issue is accessibility. Because the easier you make it for developers to develop on and engineers to build on and actually foresee and actually use it to solve their problems, the more applications that are naturally going to come out of it. And that's what's happening right now in the Web3 world. As we can tell, for those of us who are still following, is a lot of building is going on. A lot of people have diagnosed that problem. The money's all come out of the room now. So people are actually getting down to the serious science of actually, okay, let's use this technology properly as it was, well, not as it was envisioned, but as we can envision it being used. So a lot of building's going on right now. So I'm excited for what comes out. And we could kick off the next bull market. Not that I care about a bull market because I'm not a crypto investor and I don't really care about investments in particular companies. I very care about the use of technology because I'm a tech head, right? So I like messing around with innovative solutions. Go on.
And I think, so like another aspect that makes building for AI easy is that it very easily slots into a Web 2 basically native thing, right? Like there's an API and you can throw, like there's a, you know, slots right into a client server architecture. There's a server that's serving you AI powered, you know, kind of responses. Or at least it can be. You can throw like an API call at it, you know, in JSON or whatever with some like prompt string, and you get a useful result back. And that's very easy to build with, right?
Yes.
Obviously, there's other ways of building with AI that are not that, that are like, you know, where you're running models yourself and doing whatever. I don't know, like I don't fully know the landscape, but the way that people are building it with it right now slots very easily into the way that we have built things.
Yes.
And so that makes sense, right?
Yes.
And again, Web3 has been resistant to that. Like I think that the architecture of it itself has been resistant to that, not necessarily the people. You know, there's all these different interfaces that you can do and you can have between like Web 2 native systems and Web 3 native systems, and we'll like talk about some of those later, obviously. And that's also a place where security issues come in, right? When you translate basically between computing models. But in my mind, the like value proposition of Web3 is not in bridging it between Web 2, right? It's in like taking the thing as it is itself, and leaning into the parts of it that are incompatible
Yeah.
that are different, and building in that world, right?
Yep.
And we talked about, and we'll continue talking about the like social factors that go into that, along with the technical factors.
Yeah.
But that's another kind of differentiator, I guess.
You know,
right?
it's funny you talk about leaning in, right? Because it's not like we haven't done this before with even the infrastructure of the internet, right? Because I'm pretty sure Token Ring doesn't use TCP/IP, but it's obvious the advantages you could get with TCP/IP packet net switching. We leaned into that, but the difference I think here is the scale of adoption, right? So what we're talking about here is you're talking about changing the model in which we use to run a large wide area network of interconnected computers, as opposed to what was back then offices having to change their networks and upgrade them. So I can understand, obviously, there's a resistance to change. But again, I come up with another example. It's not like it hasn't been done before. We used to have modems that would go in over copper wires, and now we have fiber optic to the house in most countries, in most developed nations. So again, the investment can be there so long as the advantages. And I was actually thinking about that randomly last night as well. I was like, that was a massive project, right?
Like infrastructure project?
Yeah, infrastructure. I was like, we dug up roads.
I mean, it's still going on here, right? Like, yeah.
Right? And in the UK, it was massive. And the government effectively forced the largest telco provider at the time to do it. And I'm pretty sure if I go to most European countries, most South American nations, etc., that was the story. There was political pressure. And I'm like, how did that even happen, given how politically gridlocked we are now? To get something that big moving.
It's like actually probably one of the biggest public, like semi-public, I guess, infrastructure accomplishments.
That just happened in our lifetime. Yeah, literally. So again, foot in mouth. Okay. Do I think Web3 will ever have the adoption of the common of the Web2 world that we have now? I don't know. Will it require such a big, massive shape shift? I don't know that phase shift. Sorry, what am I talking about there? But anyway, would it require massive amounts of investment into infrastructure because it's so different? I don't think it does. But at the same time, I do think it's significant enough. The differences are significant enough that you should take it for its differences as opposed to try and adopt it like you're saying. So I agree with you 100%. And to me, that's where the excitement is about Web3. That's the gap there. In terms of potential, it's funny though, because humans are really, really bad at predicting the future. We've shown this over and over again. One of the things that I remember reading about was we're really bad at predicting the impact of something in the long term. So we can see, and this is funny, right? So you see something like Web3 and you're like, okay, so it came onto the scene. It had all this hype for one particular application. A lot of people kind of stayed away from it. The rest
being financial,
right? Just working around the whole crypto DeFi stuff. But then all of the people who know tech, and it is a technical innovation, said, no, I'm not bothering with this because they're all humans, right? Like, I don't see the potential in this. This is kind of scammy. But then AI's come on the scene and we've got, oh my goodness, the world is going to change. This is the next 10 years, we have no idea what's going to happen. Well, we do have an idea of what's going to happen. It's not going to be like it is now. That's kind of been the reaction. And so it's making me think, okay, humans are bad at predicting impact of things in the long term. What's the inverse of that then? How about actually Web3 goes on to have the more impactful changes on our technical interactions and how we do things, whereas where AI kind of it finds its use case and just runs in place as a really good Google search engine. That like a more adaptable. I don't know. What do you think?
So I mean, what's the aphorism there? Whatever is that I forget who said it, right? But it's like I'm gonna get it the wrong way around. We overestimate the impact in the short term and underestimate the impact in the long term, right?
Yes, exactly that. That's what I was
hoping. And so what, in terms of Web3, like what happened? Well, one, I feel like you can't speak about the way people reacted to Web3 as one thing.
True.
Got a visitor here.
It's okay.
Yeah. Well,
it's okay.
Okay. You can't. No.
It's okay.
That's okay. Because there were kind of clusters of reactions to it, right? And one
through time
as well,
right?
Yeah,
as things went. Yeah.
But where did kind of it's hard to speak about a general culture anymore, right? Like if that existed in the past, which is probably questionable, it certainly like in some ways doesn't exist now or exists less now. But yeah, I feel
Agreed.
like it was probably, I mean, I guess it's already been the short term. So like, what's been the impact of it in the short term?
Mm,
Practically not a ton, I would say,
mm.
right?
Oh, wait, hold on. Are you
Web
referring
three,
to
Web
Web3?
three.
Yeah, cool, got you.
And then yeah, I think it's certainly being underestimated in the long term. I would say
Hmm.
so. And then AI, you know, we haven't obviously seen a ton of it play out.
Mm,
So okay, where are we going with this? Like, where am I going with this? I guess there's multiple like unresolved questions here, right? One is, what
mm,
is the future potential of Web3, and how
mm,
does that future potential obtain?
mm.
I think there is a large future potential of Web3 to be a dominant uh, medium through which people engage in activity on the internet. I think it
Yeah,
could be the dominant medium. I don't think that that outcome is inevitable,
yes, agreed.
because of how socially driven that outcome needs to be. Like, that isn't a purely technical outcome. It's
Agreed.
not like the way, like, I think the internet was an inevitable outcome,
Do you though? But
technically.
that's kind of why I tapped into the whole thing about the switch over from copper to fiber, because I'm like, that is a socially driven. Like
Okay.
businesses had to define that this would create value, and politicians had to see it would actually create value to the GDP of their country. But that's not a foregone conclusion, because it's like, oh, I've got 56K. Why are we ever going to need any more speed? Like, okay, what are you
Well,
talking about? The
I
streaming
think in
like,
terms
I don't
of,
know.
I think if you think about it being driven by competition, right? The technical outcome being driven
That's
by
true. There
competition,
we go. Fair, fair, fair.
then you know, the competition that takes advantage of the
Mm,
higher throughput, lower
yeah, that's
latency,
true.
whatever, is going to outcompete, and that's going to drive the technical outcome.
That's a fair point.
I
That's a
I
fair point.
don't think that is the same case with Web3. Like, maybe I don't think that there is necessarily a um competitive driver to Web3 applications outcompeting. I
Huh.
suspect that it's a social driver.
Interesting. Why do you suspect that?
I don't know, dude. I'm coming up with all this stuff right now.
It's okay.
Um,
No, but it's interesting because
do you think the
I
opposite?
think the opposite.
Okay.
I think the opposite. I think okay, so some of the stuff you and I are starting to see, no, that's getting into the weeds, but I do feel like some of the stuff that's being built around authentication
Yeah.
mechanisms, decentralization, disintermediation of relationships, I do think that will be a technical, what's the word? Technical driver
Okay.
or an advantage, because well, I mean, it's basic. Like at the end of the day, the more parties that are involved in a transaction, the slower that transaction is going to go. And
Okay.
so, if you have a technology such as Web3, which removes the third party, fourth party, the
This is
middle
like the
party,
disintermediation stuff, right? So
the
your
disintermediation,
like thesis here is more disintermediation, more direct value,
things happen
competitive
quicker. Yeah,
driver.
and so you get a competitive
Okay.
drive, you get a competitive advantage, and I can see that now. Where I think your social thing overlays on top of that is, well, which industries or which transactions or which interactions have we built up that have these third parties that slow things down and will benefit the most? Now that tends to be industries that aren't naturally technical in of themselves. Now, you and I have discussed this between ourselves. I don't know if we covered it in the previous podcast, but we wanted to. So, for example, that's the reason why you're seeing a lot of interesting Web3 innovations coming out of the entertainment industry, the in music industry, number
Hmm.
one. But they're not tech savvy at all. I mean, yeah, you don't go into the stories of how they record and stuff like that. But the thing is, I think it's those industries, and then therefore those you because all right, for example, UK is a massive soft power in terms of the music industry, so it can benefit from these types of things. But it's a social industry that benefits, not
Hmm.
necessarily a business one. There are business cases, and we know people are building private blockchains or have built private blockchains, etc., to do trade settlements or DeFi stuff again.
Hmm.
But yeah, I do. I actually think yes,
Okay.
there is a social aspect to it, but I don't think the social aspect outweighs the competitive advantages you can gain for certain use cases. Again,
Yeah,
that's where
that's a
the
good
issue
point.
is.
It
So like,
depends on the use case a lot, right? Because like where my
mm,
thinking goes to is
go on.
in order for like there is a fundamental way in which, in order for Web3 use cases and applications to have value, there needs to be
Mm.
social recognition of some
Mhm.
fundamental things, right? And
Mhm.
like we talked about, and we're going to continue to talk about how one of the value points of Web3 is that it brings the concept of ownership into the internet, like a true concept
Yeah.
of ownership, right?
Mhm.
But ownership is also a social concept as much as it is a technical
Completely.
concept.
It's also a political
And a
concept as
political
well, but
concept.
we
Yeah,
won't go there.
absolutely. And so without recognition, like social and political recognition, legal recognition even of ownership, can the value materialize in a way that drives competition towards the end state? That's the part I'm not sure about in a broad sense. In some use cases, I think yes. In some use cases, I think it can leapfrog that recognition in a useful way, in a valuable way. Others, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I think, and that's where we need builders. That's where we need engineers like ourselves who have, but not just engineers who've been engineering a whole lot, people who come from specific backgrounds to be able to join those two dots. Like that's one of the great things about us working in securities. And I talk about this being a security engineer is that we get to pattern match, right? We see something somewhere else, we see it in a different context, but we know fundamentally it's the same thing. So we're able to say, okay, this could happen here, therefore you need to build this control around that. It's the same thing when building any solution to any problem. It's like, well, I come from, I don't know, maybe you're a civil engineer and you're like, well, I can actually see where, I also have an interest in tech and I can see where this problem could be solved, but in this way that no one else would have seen because they simply do not have your experience. It's not that you're super specialist, it's that you have, every individual has a different life experience. And so therefore they bring their own point of view to a problem. That's why you have the concept of diversity of thought. So yeah, that's, I think, and again, I try to keep as I try to keep as informed as I can about what's going on when being built in the Web3 world, but I'm a father with a full-time job, so there's only a limit to my powers there. But I genuinely think some really cool stuff is being cooked up right now, and I'm seeing some of it come out. Obviously, there was the gaming applications, but apparently that's really hit really big in the Far East, I'm hearing. And we know gaming's way big, tends to be like 3, 4, 5 years ahead over there, then it comes over here. So, and gaming tends to test a lot of use. And I didn't know this. And
no, I was just gonna say, like, it also tends to be an innovation center, right?
Yes, it does. Gaming, I didn't realize just that. Even though I am a lapsed gamer, I didn't realize how much of an innovation center it has been for just tech in general and concepts, development concepts, etc., and everything. So I think it's kind of like, this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think you've raised a good question about whether we'll be able to leapfrog those social boundaries in order to actually prove its use case. But I think my cop-out answer is, yeah, let's wait and see. But I'm excited. I'm quietly, what's the word? Quietly optimistic.
No, I feel that. I feel that for sure. And then I think,
but I'm still unbiased.
I was just gonna say, like, I think if we want, we could flip over to the AI side for a second.
Go on.
Because it was kind of like we're talking about the short-term, long-term impacts, right?
Yes, we are.
No way I'm going to pronounce anything about that with AI. I don't know. Like, you know, I've learned that I tend to be, like, in myself, I tend to be pessimistic about these things. And then I tend to be wrong about that pessimism. And so then I kind of like need to mentally override that to be optimistic. So I think
that's the security engineer.
Oh gosh.
That's
no.
that's right.
I try to run away from being that. So I think, you know, there's the broad question, which, like, I don't know that I'm going to have much useful to say on it, which is like, is there a fundamental limit to this? Is there a fundamental limit to this approach to AI? Or are we on an inevitable march to like AGI and either utopia or the opposite, whatever, right?
That's a really good question.
Like I think that question, the way like that question is almost like a am I going to use the right word here? I'm just going to Google it like really quickly. like a shibboleth kind of thing. Is that the word?
Okay.
In that, like, the way somebody answers that question is an input that informs how they think about a ton of stuff, right?
Yes.
But in opposite ways. So like some people will answer that question, no, there's no fundamental limit. We're on this inevitable march to AGI, and that's great,
Yep.
right? That's
Yeah.
going to be amazing. That's like the
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know why I look at things on Twitter anymore or whatever, but that's kind of like this like accelerationist moment that's going through right now, right?
Yeah.
People who are the AI critics and the AI are more pessimistic about AI answer that question the same way, but then the way that reflects through themselves is the opposite. It's like, yes, we are actually on this inevitable march. That's bad, right? Like the end state that is going to take us to is a bad outcome, and so now I'm hyper critic about this, I'm nihilistic about this, right?
Yeah.
And so like those people, like, they answer the question the same way. The ramifications of that answer gets filtered through their own, honestly, their own political understanding, their own social understanding of themselves and of others. And there's pattern matching that goes on, in group, out group stuff, whatever. And they end up at opposite places.
And that is why, just to interrupt you slightly here and let you continue your thought, that is why I came up with that whole thing about being massively underestimating the impact of something in short versus long term and how bad we are. Because I'm like, everyone's ended up at the same conclusion. So if I'm going to take the reverse of that bet, it's that maybe it's not going to have the impact
exactly.
at all.
So it's like, then is there a limit that we're going to hit, right? And so I mean, again, I should probably like stop before like I look back on this in 5 years and whatever.
No, we're going to look back and cringe, but we're going to have a good joke.
So I think the answer might be yes, right? Like I think the answer might be, and in a very tepid sort of way, like yes, there is probably a fundamental limit to this. Is that fundamental limit beyond our own fundamental limits? It could be, right?
Yeah.
It could not be as well. And it has to do with this idea of like this is being statistically based, right? And I think if you kind of analyze it enough, you could maybe come up against some fundamental limits technically based on that. I would maybe suggest like philosophically based on that as well. In terms of like there is a model world that gets created that these things answer, that like AI uses to generate its results. And that world is large. It is useful. Probably way more useful than we think in like ways that we haven't even thought of yet. But it's not complete in and of itself. And maybe you can derive in like a theoretical way some fundamental limits, and then like whether those fundamental limits make a practical difference on the time scale of like a human life. Maybe they don't. Yes. Maybe they do. I don't know. Anyway, I'll stop. Please stop me.
No, that's good. No, that's good. To be honest, I don't have much more to add about this, and that kind of brings us up to time as well. I really do like that wrapping up. To put a bow on it, it's like, so it's clearly obvious that the use cases of, well, it's not clearly obvious. The use cases of AI were clearly obvious and were built to fit in the world that we currently have, whereas Web3 wasn't and never tried to, and since its use cases aren't as obvious. It then also got tarred with the whole crypto DeFi stuff as well, so that kind of turned off a lot of people. But at the end of the day, once the use cases prove themselves out, we'll then come to see which one has the more lasting impact. From a tech perspective, we are still both more interested in Web3 than we are AI, although AI is super cool and amazing, and both of us are using it on a daily basis anyway. So yeah, watch this space. We'll look back. You'll be able to call us on this at some point. I don't know, maybe in the comments. I don't know, in 5 years' time. But yeah, watch this space. But this was definitely an inspiration around what we think, why something has the impact over something that doesn't. Basically, that's what it comes down to. Why engineers and why something can have the social impact that it does when released in similar circumstances, having similar. Not similar goals, but basically, yeah, similar circumstances. Anyway, I'm going to stop waffling there. I just want to say thank you for your time, Michael. And until next week, have a great week.
You too.
All right. See you later. Bye.